Burkina Faso has just made a bold move, one that shook not only its own borders, but also the international stage. Earlier this week, the government declared United Nations Resident Coordinator Carol Flores Merchaniak persona non grata, basically ordering her to leave the country immediately. Why such a drastic step? It all began with a UN report titled Children and Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso. In that report, the UN accused Burkina Faso's defense forces of committing serious violations against children. But in Ouagadougou, the capital, the government's reaction was swift and furious. Officials dismissed the report as baseless, full of lies, and prepared without a single consultation with Burkinabe authorities. To them, it wasn't just wrong, it was an insult. A story written about Burkina Faso, but without Burkina Faso. So, the country hit back with its strongest weapon, diplomatic rejection. They expelled the UN's top representative. Their statement was sharp. Accusations must be backed by evidence, investigations, and proper rulings, not by unchecked claims published in glossy reports sent to the Security Council. Anything less, they said, will not be tolerated. The United Nations, for its part, expressed regret. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric reminded the world that UN staff enjoy international privileges and immunities, and that the UN still intends to continue supporting Burkina Faso. But in Ouagadougou, the message was already loud and clear. This wasn't about rejecting the UN itself. It was about rejecting what Burkina Faso sees as disrespect, a habit of publishing sweeping judgments about African nations without dialogue, without fairness, and without truth. Welcome to Burkina Now, where we tell the stories that matter. Stories grounded in real actions, trusted sources, and honest reporting. If you believe Africa deserves clarity instead of noise, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still doubts that change is possible. Because what happened in Burkina Faso this week isn't just a headline, it's a country standing tall, demanding respect. A nation saying, if you won't speak truthfully about us, you cannot speak for us. The controversial report at the center of this storm, Children and Armed Conflict in Burkina Faso, was presented to the UN Security Council earlier this year. It listed alleged violations: child recruitment by armed groups, killings, abductions, and even attacks on schools and hospitals in conflict zones. But here's where the anger exploded. Some of those accusations also pointed fingers at Burkina Faso's own defense forces. The very soldiers risking their lives to protect villages were now accused of being violators themselves. For the government, that was the ultimate red line. In a fiery statement, Burkina Faso said the report was full of falsehoods, lacked credible investigations, and contained no court rulings, no verifiable data, and no local inquiries. In other words, it was built on sand. And worse, it was sent to the world without even giving Burkina Faso a chance to respond. For leaders in Ouagadougou, this was beyond unacceptable. They stressed that Burkina Faso is not afraid of scrutiny, but scrutiny must be fair. Reports written in New York and Geneva, without sitting down with people on the ground, hold no weight here. The government went even further, accusing the report's authors of putting Burkina Faso's armed forces and the extremist groups they fight on the same level. For the Burkinabe people, this wasn't just wrong, it was offensive. How, they asked, can defenders of communities be compared to those who massacre children? How can farmers be blamed for destroying their own crops, when it's the locusts devouring the fields? That is how Burkina Faso sees it. Its soldiers and local volunteers are fighting every day against brutal extremist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Many have died in this struggle. Entire families displaced. Villages turned into ghost towns. And in the middle of this sacrifice, to accuse the army of the same crimes as the terrorists, that was a wound too deep to ignore. Burkina Faso's decision to expel the UN representative was therefore not just about politics. It was about dignity, about sovereignty, about saying clearly, we will not let others write our story for us. At the United Nations headquarters, the response was diplomatic but disappointed. Spokesman Stéphane Dujarric reminded everyone that UN staff have international protection and are allowed to carry out their work in host countries. But on the ground in Burkina Faso, the message was already sealed. The country will not be spoken for. For the UN, this expulsion wasn't just about one disputed report. It was a direct challenge to its authority. Yet, JAR made it clear, the UN would not abandon Burkina Faso. It would continue working with the country's people, no matter the obstacles. And at the center of this storm is one woman, Carol Flores Mrechniak. With over 20 years of experience in humanitarian aid, development, and conflict zones, she was handpicked just last year to coordinate the UN's efforts inside Burkina Faso. But now, the government has declared her persona non grata, essentially telling the world she could no longer be trusted as a partner. Why? According to Burkina Faso's leadership, the moment she co-chaired the creation of a report they saw as false and disrespectful, she lost the credibility required to work in Ouagadougou. Still, the country made one thing very clear. This was not a rejection of the entire UN system. Instead, the message was precise. We remain open to cooperation, but only with representatives who act with sincerity and respect for our sovereignty. That distinction is powerful. It signals that Burkina Faso is not turning its back on the world. It is demanding fairness, accountability, and dignity in its partnerships. But this raises an unsettling question. If international reports can shape global opinion without consultation, who then holds the authors accountable? That question lies at the heart of this entire dispute. To see the bigger picture, we need to step back. Burkina Faso's decision is not an isolated act. It is part of a larger struggle across the Sahel. For more than a decade, Burkina Faso has been on the front lines of a brutal conflict. Armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS have terrorized villages, destroyed schools, attacked markets, and displaced millions. Entire communities are living in crisis. In response, Burkina Faso, like Mali and Niger, has seen dramatic political shifts. Between 2020 and 2023, a wave of military coups swept the region, bringing young officers to power. And with them came a new slogan: sovereignty first. But what does sovereignty mean here? It means refusing to let outsiders write narratives without local voices. It means questioning reports, rejecting unfair judgments, and demanding partnerships built on equal terms. Burkina Faso has already joined hands with Mali and Niger in forming the Alliance of Sahel States (AES). Together, they have challenged global institutions, pulled away from ECOWAS, and sought new defense, trade, and diplomatic alliances. And now, by expelling a senior UN representative, Burkina Faso is making one thing clear. This sovereignty stance is not just talk, it's action. Across Africa, reactions are mixed. Some fear this is a dangerous step away from international cooperation. Others see it as a long overdue stand, an insistence that African nations cannot be reduced to footnotes in someone else's reports, but must be respected as partners with equal dignity. Still, this bold step comes with risks. International ties matter. Aid programs, humanitarian projects, and diplomatic channels are vital in fighting poverty and conflict. But Burkina Faso's leaders argue that the greater danger lies in silence, allowing accusations to circulate unchallenged, shaping global perception without a response. That's why this expulsion matters. It is not just about one official. It's about the principle that Burkina Faso, and increasingly the Sahel, will no longer accept being spoken about without being spoken to. What began as a report on children in conflict has now become a defining moment, a showdown between global institutions and African sovereignty. So what does this really mean for Burkina Faso? For some, it's a bold affirmation of sovereignty, a refusal to be painted with false accusations. For others, it's a troubling sign of growing distance between African governments and international bodies. But inside Burkina Faso, the message is crystal clear. We will not let outsiders define us without truth, and we will not let our dignity be undermined without response. Importantly, this is not rejection, it is correction. Burkina Faso is not shutting the door on the UN, but demanding accuracy, fairness, and mutual respect. And this struggle reaches far beyond Burkina Faso. For years, African governments have complained about biased reports written without consultation. This moment, then, is not about one report. It's about Africa raising its voice. Listen to us before you speak about us. For Captain Ibrahim Traore, this move fits perfectly with the philosophy he has championed since coming to power: sovereignty, dignity, and self-reliance. To many Burkina-based citizens, the expulsion is proof that these words are not empty slogans. They are being defended through action. The symbolism is powerful. When a small nation dares to expel the representative of one of the most powerful global institutions, it sends a roar across the world. We are not weak. We are not voiceless. and we will not be reduced to silence. So the question is no longer just about Burkina Faso. Across Africa, people are asking, when reports are written without African voices, will more nations rise and demand respect? Will this moment fade into the headlines, or mark the beginning of a wider sovereignty movement across the continent? This is Burkina Now, where we tell the stories that matter, based on real action, trusted sources, and honest reporting. If you believe Africa deserves clarity, not noise, share this story. Because Burkina Faso has spoken, not with fear, but with dignity, and the world has heard. The only question left is, how will it respond?